This is my festive mug. It makes me so happy to drink out of this mug that I'm genuinely like, why don't I have more festive mugs? Like one for spring, one for Halloween, one for like the autumn time. Just give something a bit of pizzazz, because I drink everything out of this now. Like I've been cleaning this after every single use and then just making a new cup immediately because I really love the vibe of just drinking out of this one mug. So I'm like, maybe this should be the vibe. Like, I need to buy some more. Maybe I should go charity shopping for them. That would be fun. I should do that. I should do that. Anyway, this is my festive mug, and I'm going to go through all the things that I read this autumn. This video to be a bloomin' readathon vlog. Like I wanted to go through like everything that I've read, blah blah blah, and I just like didn't read enough. Like I just only read like 3 books, and whilst I was planning on doubling up for the bloomin' readathon, I wasn't planning on doubling up that, so I just like didn't finish most of these books like by the time that I needed to. Like I have this printed out and didn't use it because I didn't know anything. I didn't read enough because I started off the month pretty slow. Like I really wanted to read a couple of like cozy fantasy books and I just didn't like them. I didn't like any of them. I think I've come to the realization that I'm not a rom-com girly, especially not in book form. I really like rom-com movies because, you know, it's 1 hour and they're done, but I think in a book I just don't think there's enough reward for me personally. Like I'm not getting enough satisfaction from the romance that's in a book if I'm gonna spend like, you know, 6 hours reading it. Okay, 6 hours maybe a bit long, but you know, I just didn't like it. So I tried to read Half a Soul, I tried to read Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry, and I tried to read one other book. What was the other one? And I tried to read A Very Secret Society of Witches, I think. That's the other one that I wanted to read. And I just like couldn't get into it. I didn't care. I literally did not give one crap about these books. I tried to read Ruthless Lady and I got like 50 pages in, and that was the thing that was really giving me like the slump. I was in it for maybe 2 weeks and I just was not feeling it. I think also at the same time I wanted to read another book, but anyway, didn't happen. The readathon would not happen. So I'm just gonna go through everything I read this autumn because I think I just prefer to do it over seasonal times because, well, usually I don't actually read that much. This one I've got a lot to go through, but again, I've got videos for most of these as well, but I just want to go through one in every video and go through some of the newer books that I read that were meant to be in my Bloom and Readathon video. So the first book that I read was Chain of Thorns. This is the latest Cassandra Clare book. Yeah, definitely still is, I think. No, she has another book, but that's not in the Shadowhunter series. But yeah, I'm an avid follower of the series. I've been reading them since I was 12, so Stockholm Syndrome. But I did not like this book. This book was very samey. It was very exactly the same as everything else. Not in plot-wise. I'll give Cassandra her, you know, her flowers. It's flowers. Give her flowers. I'll give Cassandra her flowers for being able to write different plots and being able to interweave them throughout different series, okay? But I really didn't like the miscommunication trope in this. It's in all of her books. It's something that it's started to massively piss me off. I don't like it anymore and I really want it to stop. But she obviously has it in this and it's so annoying because it just like doesn't need to be there. Like this is one of the series where the miscommunication doesn't make any sense at all and it's such a big part of the plot and the romance. Obviously a big part of her books is the romance and that's usually where the miscommunication lies. And so you're like, okay, fine. But it's so entangled with the rest of the plot that I'm just like, enough, Cassandra, please leave us alone. The second one I read was Fevered Stars. This is the sequel to The Black Sun, or just Black Sun, by Rebecca Romanos, and I really liked it. It wasn't as good as Black Sun. I think Black Sun was probably like one of my favorite books of the year that I've read it, and this one didn't have that much of an oomph or impact on me, but I still really liked it. I think this is set after an apocalypse. I don't know why I say I think, I know it is. It's about the ramifications of this big religious apocalypse that's happening and it's really interesting because of that. I think seeing the fallout of something happening without actually like leading up to it, like we don't know why this is meant to happen in the first book, like we just know that it's going to, and we're on the side of people who are going to start the apocalypse, and then we kind of shift in this book to the people who are being affected by it, and that's really interesting. And everyone who was sort of a part of the world order before the apocalypse are all still characters. So that's a really nice, interesting dynamic in this book that doesn't really happen in a lot of fantasy and a high fantasy where we're sort of seeing every side of different religions. Because usually we have like one main character, the bad characters in the other religion, whereas like everyone's kind of evil but you're meant to root for them anyway. And I kind of like that because there's not like one person who's evil, because if you're on any of their sides, all of the other factions are fighting against that one person. So seeing a lot of different type of protagonists, very intriguing, kind of Game of Thrones-esque, but even there, you know, you have a protagonist that you're trying to root for. I think you are meant to root for Daenerys, whereas in this, you're a little bit more undecided on who you're going to vote for, because there's way more personal entanglements here. Yeah, I really recommend that. I've never read anything like this. I don't know why, it just has a different kind of vibe to it. So if you want anything high fantasy that is under-recommended and perhaps underrated, I really recommend Black Sun. The next book is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I don't know if everyone's heard about the stuff with the 60 scoop, but obviously there is that stuff. People are kind of talking about him in this sort of negative way because of the stuff that happened with the House on the Cerulean Sea. I don't know how I feel about it. Okay, because I feel like if we criticize TJ Klune for that, we also need to start kind of discussing the issues around things like The Handmaid's Tale and things like The Hunger Games, where we're looking at oppression and being written by somebody who doesn't face that kind of oppression, right? The idea in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, you know, especially as someone who was taught it at school, is that all of the things in that book happen to women around the world. But obviously those things happen majority-wise to women of colour, and then the whole point is that we're really sad to see it happen to this white woman. And of course, you know, all of the bad things happening at one time is part of the world building, but it does have a sour taste in your mouth when you realise it's, you know, an amalgamation of horrible things that are happening to, you know, black and brown women around the world, happening to this unsuspecting white woman, and then that's the thing, that's the phenomena. And that's kind of the same issue that people are having with The House on the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, where he takes the idea of the 60s scoop and gives his own spin on it to sort of make species of oppression who are under oppressive forces. And yes, fine, but, you know, I think perhaps the fact that he specifically shared that as his example does, you know, not sit well with a lot of native readers, and I'm gonna stand by them. I really wanted to read his other book, In the Life of Puppets, or something puppets. It was like a Pinocchio retelling type of thing, and I'm just not going to. I don't know where I feel. I don't know where I stand, honestly, because it's got a much bigger precedent. I know he's a more modern author, like obviously The Handmaid's Tale is now in the canon, we can't really fight against it. He is someone, obviously, that's much more up and coming. He's established, but you know what I mean? Like, he's not as big a figure as Margaret Atwood. So I don't know where I stand, but I really liked Under the Whispering Door, and I don't know how I feel about saying that. It's really good. Honestly, he's a really good writer, and he really brings a lot of emotion into his books that I don't see in a lot of other cozy fantasies that are perhaps a little bit more blasé about everything, that's not just like, oh, haha, fun and not really good writing, whereas he's such a good writer. You know, I am leaning towards, you know, giving him up more than not standing with native people. So I don't know where I'm standing. I don't know. It's a weird situation. Yeah, the next thing that I read was Legends and Lattes, which did catch a stray in my last bit there. I did not like this book. Okay, I didn't like this book because so much of it is just boring, okay? We have the idea that obviously a cafe is being built in this fantasy world, and that's really interesting. That's really cool, okay? One of my like long-term interesting passion projects is this one Tumblr text posts from the Tumblr account Accio Shitpost, which was like a pretty popular Harry Potter shitpost account back in like 2015, and they made this post being like, what if there was a mockumentary style, like, you know, The Office or Parks and Rec or Modern Family, of a department in the Ministry of Magic. I've always thought that was a cool idea. Obviously, do not stand with JKR anymore. That's always been something that's very interesting to me. So this, like, you know, upswelling of fantasy and cozy fantasy has always been something that's interesting. But I think that something that all of these books lack is that they're not funny. Like, a mockumentary would be funny. I think a big part of me finding cozy fantasy interesting is things like Ghosts on the BBC, or What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show, and also Good Omens. And I just don't think these new books are either written as well, have enough emotion expressed, / I don't think they're funny. I think perhaps they need to be funnier to make this work, or need to be more endearing, and I don't think they have either of those, especially since Legends of Lattes is all about this sort of like pragmatic idea of like a coffee shop existing in this fantastical world, right? But the thing is, the stakes in this book don't come from that. They come from, it's like magical idea, this life that the orc Vivian, her life before she starts up the coffee shop. The issue is with her mercenary lifestyle, and I just feel like that's useless. in this scenario, since it's meant to be about the realistic aspect. I just wish it was something much more like, you know, money troubles or emotional turmoil, rather than this sort of like outlandish fantastical aspect being the thing that gives this book stakes. I think there's a lot that could go wrong with a coffee shop being made in a fantastical world that didn't have to do with something kind of odd coming in and like disrupting the force of the book. Then I read Mooncakes, which again, I talked about this in another video. I don't want to go into too much detail about this one. This one's a graphic novel. It's about this witch and her werewolf best friend and their kind of hijinks and issues that they go through. Yeah, that was what that's about. I liked it. I think I just wish it had more substance to it, and I will read anything that they put out. If they make anything with this kind of vibe again, I just hope that there's a bit more added to it, but clearly I'm not the target audience. I think this is made for 12-year-olds, so maybe I should cut them some slack. Then I read Sword Heart. Okay, this is my first T. Kingfisher book, and I follow Katie Marie, and she loves T. Kingfisher, and I just wanted to give it a go. I was in my cozy fantasy mood. I did not like this book. I feel like I don't really get along with things that are cringe. Is this book cringe? Yeah, I would say this book is kind of cringe. Like, it's meant to be taken very seriously, which is fine. I just don't think that that's for me. I think this couple that had a weird vibe. Them as a couple, not that weird. I didn't really like their characters. I didn't really care about the third act breakup because of course there was one, even though this is a cozy fantasy. It's a romance novel genre plot line anyway, so yeah, I liked the plot. Basically, it's about a girl who marries someone and then her husband dies and then she goes to live with the husband's uncle, but the uncle leaves all of his like inheritance money to her. So his family, like the husband's family, is like, we want your money, give us the money, like, so you need to remarry into our family. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. And so she's like, I'm gonna kill myself. Which is an interesting dynamic. She's like, I'm gonna kill myself, I hated being married, I preferred when I was sort of just single living with the uncle, I'm gonna kill myself, I don't want to do this. And so when she like tries to kill herself with the sword, this sort of like knight pops up out of the sword, and they basically realize like this sword is a knight, and basically the knight is like, I can't let you kill yourself, like you're my bearer now, so I have to protect you. And it's about them escaping the family who have like sort of locked her away until she like basically agrees to marry into their family again. It's very hijinks and kooky, but I just don't think it has like, it's just not funny. I think for me, I just don't find a lot of books funny. I don't think a lot of authors are funny. To their credit though, I think movies are funnier and like TV shows are funnier because they have teams. Like, it's rarely ever just one person looking over a script, right? There's script supervisors and just teams of people that work on comedy shows. Whereas on a book, it's pretty much predominantly you. And if you're not funny, your characters aren't funny, and I hardly ever find book characters funny, and I find that horrible to say because I wish they were, and other people find them funny. Like the YouTuber that I watch, she finds this book funny, and I'm like, oh, I don't. Maybe it's just because I'm too irony pill. But like, I do really like endearing romance. I just don't care for these characters that much. So the next book that I read was Priory of the Orange Tree. I'm just gonna like sit back and be like, I made a whole video just where I spend maybe 10 minutes bitching about this book. So maybe go watch that. I really hate this book. I really dislike this book. I think I would give it like a 1 star. I hated all the narrative voices. I think all of the characters were useless and this plotline was garbage. Her writing is nice. Yeah, so Samantha Shannon, you have that going for you. Everything else, I cannot say I agree with. The next book I really did like. It was Song of Achilles. I really liked Circe, so picking this up, I was like, I think I'm gonna like it. Plus, I am into Greek mythology. I know stuff about it, so I was just like, okay, cool, I know the story already. I'm not gonna be like upset when Achilles, you know, dies. So I was really engaged with it, especially since a lot of this book happens during the war, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it was gonna spend more time when they were younger, because obviously this is like kind of pitched as a romance novel, but I like that so much of it is during the war because it really gives a nice, interesting look at Achilles and his motivations as a person. It gives him this like personality outside of what he is in his relationship, and I actually like his personality, unlike the characters in Sword Heart. Then I read These Violent Delights. Okay, I didn't like this book. Again, in that same video, I talk about 3 hyped books on TikTok, and I talked about them on there if you want like a longer review of those, but I didn't like this book because I thought it was really childish, considering that they're meant to be like characters taking over their family's mafia. They're meant to be like the new mafia boss, mafiosos, and they're just useless. And I feel like it just falls into that YA trap of that happening all the time, where characters are meant to be really powerful, but they're just like not, because you're in their head and they're stupid, but then from outside they're apparently really cool and impressive. And I'm like, I don't think that's true at all. And I think we need to change the way we talk about YA, and we need to lower the stakes and have people perhaps be mafiosos in training. You know, I think that's allowed. I don't know if you need to be the head boss at 17. I think your 50-year-old father could probably dash it out for another 20 years, okay? Like, come on now. So the next book that I read was Juniper and Thorn. I really like this book. Again, I made a video about all of these books, aside from like the last couple that I'm going to get to. This was also a book I read when I wanted to read some horror, and I don't know if it was horror, but it was definitely like sort of eerie. And it's about this witch, and she is basically locked up in her house with her two other sisters by her father, because he wants to control them. It's this sort of like abusive, toxic relationship with her father, and she kind of escapes one day with her sisters to go and see the ballet, and basically it just goes from there, and how she wants to be free, and how she's kind of being abused by everyone in her life, and how she is taking sort of small steps to free herself from that mindset and from that environment. And just the magic in this is so cool. Just everything about the way that this character is developed and the way that she's described is so like crushing. Like it feels horrifying in a way that is like inward instead of sort of like, ugh, you know? Because I have some other book in here that I'm like, ugh, I didn't like that. But that wasn't what the vibe was here. It was much more of like an internal battle. Trigger warnings for that book though. Definitely don't read it if you struggle with an eating disorder. The next book I read was The Library at Mount Char. So this was like a small book that I got recommended ages ago by like a Twitter user, and I really enjoyed this book. I don't think it was my favorite book I've ever read. It wasn't that scary. I think I was meant to be reading this because I really wanted to read a horror book, and I don't think it gave me that vibe. But this again is a book about an apocalypse, but whilst Fevered Star is about like the scope of the like tragedy and just how many people it affects, here the scope is like small. It's about like a couple of people who are like orchestrating this entire big apocalypse and how it's affected their entire life, which is much more about like the proceedings before the apocalypse, whereas Fevered Star is everything about after the apocalypse, which I think is also very interesting. Here they have a group of people who have been taken in as like orphans, and they get put in this library and they get told to learn some things about the world by this one man who is sort of their father now. And a lot of the book is also them trying to come to grips with the fact that their father might actually be God and how to reconcile with that idea. It's very adult. Like, it's a very adult book. I think it was one of the first books that I was like, oh, this is what adult fiction feels like. Because I've been trying to be like, I want to read more adult fiction. But then I'm like, I don't feel like any of these books that I go into being like, okay, this is labelled as adult fiction. And it's not a classic, because I've read a lot of classics. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, when I'm talking about books that I really want to read, and I'm like, does this feel adult? And sometimes it just doesn't, even though it is. And I'm like, I feel like someone is labeling these books wrong, because I just feel like maybe this 22-year-old isn't feeling very adult to me. The next book that I have read is Uzumaki. Uzumaki is a graphic novel by Junji Ito. It is literally the most terrifying thing I've ever read, ever seen in my life. It's so scary. Like, maybe comes second to the Taiwanese horror film Incantation, which is genuinely so fucking scary that when me and my friends watched it, we had to then sleep in the same room afterwards, even though we had all got different rooms in the house we were staying at on holiday. Okay, so high praise to how scary this is. I will say though, maybe don't read this if you have trypophobia. I also then read Garlic and the Vampire. So this is about a little garlic. She's a little garlic and she comes to life, and her friends, who are all part of this little vegetable patch that is run by a little witch, they all harvest crops together to sell at the market. They basically one day find out that someone is started to live in a castle that's sort of in the mountain kind of far away. They see smoke coming out of the castle and they're like, someone is there, and they think it's a vampire. So they send off Garlic to fight this vampire because she is a little garlic, and Garlic scares away vampires, blah blah blah. And it's really cute, it's a really sweet story. Again, it's probably for 10-year-olds, but it's very, very cute. And I also read the sequel to it, Garlic and the Witch, which is like their prequel story, sort of like their origin story of how the little garlic comes to be and what her future is going to look like. I think I perhaps prefer cozy fantasy when it's just like for 10-year-olds, because I either want really good stakes or like I don't care about stakes. Like I don't like this in-between middle crap where it's like there are stakes, but they're just not very good. Like I just want more thought out stakes. TJ Klune, I'm gonna miss you, I'm so sorry. The next thing that I read was Tomi, which is also another graphic novel by Junji Ito. So same guy who wrote Uzumaki, and this is also very scary. Not as scary. So this one is a bit more vignette-y, so this is like short stories about the same woman. And this woman basically has this sort of like curse on her where when men come close to her, they become obsessed with her and they want to cut her up and chop her into pieces. Insane premise, I know. So it just happens again and again and again, and we go through different stories on how it happens. It's not chronological, so we find out her story through like osmosis of like realizing what's going on in this story. It is creepy, but it's not like scary. Some of the pictures are scary. I think some of them are like, oh, you see that and you're like, whoa, he's really good. His art style is very like scratchy. The pen is very good at creating weird, very sort of disturbing details in a way that you perhaps wouldn't expect from like an animation or other kinds of visual media. Like I think pen specifically in this scenario, the creepy. And then I read Delicates. I, again, have a video about this. Should I say that about every single fucking thing that I read? Delicates, it's a graphic novel, which is the sequel to Sheets. I really liked Sheets when I first read it, and I really like this as well. This is just a continuation of that story. Sheets is about these ghosts coming to life, and they use sheets to kind of like show her, this main character, that they exist. When they like dance around, like move, they're wearing the sheet to sort of show where they are. It's about her relationship with one specific ghost who's wearing a sheet. It's a really sweet story. It's quite heartwarming. The actual scenario that we first get into Sheets with is very sad, but it's a very like cozy, nice, adorable story. Again, cozy fantasy done well, which again is just my rom-com like abstinence, like abhorrence? It's not when you like don't like it. You just like aversion, that's it. My rom-com aversion. I just don't like it when they're rom-coms. I think I prefer it when they're about like friends and family. The next thing I read was 2 short story collections. So first one is Her Body and Other Parties. This one was really weird and kind of creepy. This one had some interesting stories and some that I was like, okay, this happened, I guess. I was very interested by the one about the husband stitch. If you know what that is, that's really creepy and it's really weird, and it's a thing about husbands stitching up their like wives' vaginas when they're like comatose and like super out of it when they've just given a baby. Really creepy, really hate it. Very good subject matter to make a horror story on though. So I recommend it just for that. If you like that one, that I recommend reading them. Like if you're gonna read it, maybe you'd like find that one, read it as a sample. I think that comes as a sample on the ebook. So maybe read it like then. There's one about a gastric band being put in, which I think is a good, interesting idea for a story about body horror. And then the next one I read was Cursed Bunny. So this is a Korean translated short story collection. Some of it was a little bit more abstract than the others. I think the ones that were a bit more concrete were the ones I liked a bit more. The ones where like weird, odd shit was just happening and they were like in your face about it, and it was like social commentary on things like class and race and gender. So the next thing I read was Taproot. So this is a graphic novel about a ghost and this human who can see them. And it's odd that he can see them because no one else can. And basically it's just about figuring out why he can see them and this relationship between the ghost and the boy. Basically, gay ghosts, we love to see it. There's a lot of gay ghosts actually, a lot of gay ghost stories these days. I would like to see an essay about. The thing I read was The Sprite and the Gardener, which is just about a little fairy helping this garden grow. It's very beautiful, like it's a very pretty book, and I wouldn't recommend it for anything else other than the actual like illustrations. It's not very interesting, but if you really like little kid books and if you want to give someone a little kid book, this is the one because it's very, very pretty. Like the actual fairies, gorgeous to look at. Everything else, like the story and stuff, yeah, whatever. The next one is Aquicorn Cove. I tried to say that 5 times before I got it right, and I did the same thing in the last video I talked about this book. This is such a hard thing to say. I don't know why they've named a children's book this. But yeah, this is about this girl who goes to the coast after a storm sweeps through the coastline town to help rebuild, and she finds out some interesting things about the nearby ocean and the people that live under the ocean. If you like graphic novels for 10-year-olds and it's up your street, then this is the one. But this is definitely not one of the ones where I'm like, this is really interesting and I would recommend it for the story and the plotline. Again, this is one that I would be like, it's quite pretty to look at and it's quite fast to read. Finally, we get on to some books that I've not actually talked about before. Like, I don't think anybody watches all of my videos, so regardless, this is a video for people anyway. So The Goldfinch. So The Goldfinch is is a Donna Tartt book. I don't really like or care about The Secret History. I read it last year around the same time I read The Goldfinch, and it was fun. It was fun, but I didn't really care for it. It's about this like group of people who are insufferable, and I knew they would be, but I actually was sad that they weren't more insufferable, because I thought the main character that we kept following, Richard, he was also going to get to do insufferable things, and he just doesn't. He doesn't at any point. He just has to watch insufferable things happen and just be involved, which is so sad, because I just wish that he got to do sad, like, mad people shit, and he just doesn't. Okay, because I knew people who were really into ancient Greek at school, and they were nuts, so I understood that that was where they were coming from, whereas in The Goldfinch, everything that's mental happens to the main character, which I'm like, yes, took her 20 years to realise they want to see weird shit happen, and it does, and it does. This is a mystery book, it's a crime book, which I wasn't expecting, even though I've known about this book for so long that I didn't realise it was about art crime. But basically, the main character, Theo Decker, steals this picture of the Goldfinch from the MoMA, I want to say, basically like a big art gallery museum, after this big explosion happens at the museum, and he takes it, and he runs away with it. It's incredible, it's very engaging, like, it's way more engaging than The Secret History. If you didn't really like The Secret History and you liked her writing style, like if you really liked the academic, dark academia, sort of like grunge, sad vibes that you got from The Secret History, maybe that's not what you're gonna get here. But if you really liked her writing style, but you didn't love the plot, this is the book that you're looking for. This won the Women's Prize, I think in 2014, and my god was it good, and I understand why it won, and maybe I need to be looking towards more Women's Prize winners to find books to put on my like to read, because I really liked this book. The ending was a little bit like vague, but that's okay, because I was really on board for everything else. Like, I really liked the main character and how questionable he was and how impressionable he was, and the fact that he was a child and how that affected the ways that he thought about things. Like, I really liked that he was a child, but we weren't really seeing from a child's perspective. Like, it was about a kid, but we weren't like in the kid's head. And I was like, this is sick. I want more of this. I want to be able to see like a teenager and them not be like stupid as shit. The narrative voice doesn't want to dumb them down. Like, if a YA book wants to have this vibe, I'm down, because I want more of this. But I guess this is an adult book, and Donna Tartt is a really good writer, and I feel like most writers just don't have it in them to do this. But that was really cool that there was like an adult voice, but it was a teenager who was actually like doing all of the things that were happening in the book. Like, the plot line was being progressed by a teenager. The next book that I read was Vladimir. So Vladimir is about this man who has been accused of sexual like abuse, or like misconduct more than abuse, basically, because he has been sleeping with his students. They're all over age, but there's this sort of weird dichotomy between them where it's like, but he is their professor and he should have this position of power over them, and he's kind of abused it because of the way that he has like approached and been with his students. And essentially it's these girls coming up and talking against him, but it doesn't really follow him. It's kind of the way that his wife deals with this fact. So the wife becomes really obsessed with this new professor that's come into their department. So she's also a professor. They're both professors and they're married, and she gets really obsessed with this new professor that comes in, and it's really dark, it's salacious, it's incredible, it's so well written, and it's so engaging. But I liked that there was a realism to the way that perhaps a 40-year-old woman, a 50-year-old woman I think she is, would see her husband's like sexual abuse case. The next thing that I read was Bunny. This was about this group of girls who go to this elite college which does a really good creative writing program, and they're all in a little clique except the main character, and her name is Samantha, and she looks at them and they all call each other Bunny. They're like, hi Bunny, hey Bunny, what's up Bunny, like how was your night Bunny? And she's like, why do they do that? That's so odd. And they're like really preppy, they're really cliquey, and she does not like them. They're really girly and hyper feminine, and she hates that aspect of them. And one day they invite her to their writing session called the Smut Salon. And basically the entire plot goes from there. It is a very, very, very weird book. Like, oh my god, balls to the wall, crazy. Honestly, I wasn't seeing that coming. I knew it was weird, but I wasn't thinking it was going to be this weird. Like, I didn't see the plot coming at all, and even though I've told you it's weird, you're still not going to guess what happens. I was very confused, but at the same time, I think that's what you're meant to be left with. I don't think you're meant to be left with this idea of understanding what was going on. I think you're meant to take in the absolutely euphoric, crazy vibe that the entire book gives off. The insane on-edgeness, however, definitely well written. Even the characters that are meant to meld together, and I actually really recommend this, especially if you do like dark academia. I think this is something that fits into that vibe and that genre really well in comparison to some of the things that I think are generally espoused as part of this genre. The next two are like absolute flops, and I actually DNF'd both of them. So the next one is Disorientation, and this was something I was so excited to read, okay? This is about a girl who has been doing her dissertation on this one Chinese American poet. He's like the great Chinese American poet, and she basically finds some odd things going on in her sort of archive at her university. So this poet was a professor at the place that she actually studies now, and so she has lots of good resources to sort of like actually go in and deep dive on this specific poet. And she realizes that what actually is going on is really weird, and I just don't think it was actually that weird. Like the synopsis and everything around this kind of make you think that it's going to be something really cool. Like it makes you think there's going to be like a big mystery, and essentially the plot of this is just the same plot as Yellowface, and you're like, oh, I don't even like it when Yellowface did it. Actually, this book came out first, but I think honestly, between this book, Yellowface, and the movie Not Okay does it best. I don't like the satirical voice they use in this. I don't think it's funny. I don't think the main character is interesting, and I think that's a big issue because she seems like an idiot considering she's a PhD student. Not that PhD students can't be idiots, but I feel like if your speciality is like Chinese American literature and you have no understanding on race bias, it just seems improbable, you know? Like I think some things I can only suspend my belief for so long. And for certain things, and I don't think this was one of them, so I really didn't like this book and I had to put it down because I was like, oh, I hate the voice, the narrative voice, ugh, horrible, I really wasn't liking it. Anyway, the next thing I read was The Traitor Baru Cormorant. So this was the book that really put me in a slump, mainly because right, at the beginning of this, I kind of told you that I really wanted to read some cozy fantasy. And the thing that was really kind of stopping me because I really wanted to read this book instead. So while I was like kind of, slogging through them, I was really trying to read those books. I was much more interested in reading this. And I just knew that I really wanted to finish the fantasy before I got to this, but I couldn't even get myself to read those because I really didn't like them. So when I finally got to this, I was reading and I realized I didn't like it. I really couldn't get myself into this. I think it was just the characterization was just so weak. I don't know why I didn't like this because a lot of people I really enjoy and people I trust with my sort of bookish recommendation opinions. Like I would take their opinion because I think they've given me good recommendations before. I just can't trust them anymore because this, I just felt weird that I didn't like this because I knew that this was about like a revolution and it was a adult book about a revolution in a sci-fi world, and I thought that was cool. And I was on board to understand all the world building. I'm not somebody who's put off by that. I really like fantasy and sci-fi. So I thought this was going to be a big thing for me. And I really didn't like it. I think something that I've always thought is I don't really care whether or not a sci-fi book is about fighting. I don't mind if it's just about understanding a world and looking at all of the different concepts that are introduced into them. It doesn't need to be a big fantasy action thriller type vibe, And this is just kind of a little bit too boring. I'm like, maybe I do like that because this is about accounting. So the way they want to take down sort of governance in this oppressive state is through accounting. That's very important, right? Like understanding a revolution is a big part of that is accounting. It's about understanding the budget and how the world will work after the revolution. And I just don't think those things were met. I think a lot of the things we were meant to be taking as important or critical to understanding were just so boring. The main character just speeds through life. We're okay, and then she's doing this, and she's doing this, and this is happening, and she's talking to this person. And I just don't think they were developing each thing to make us want to understand the character more and be in her space and understand why she was doing things. Because a big part of this is to take, not revenge, but sort of take back the horrible things that have happened to her world. They've erased her culture, and I think that's such a cool concept to explore, but they just don't spend any time telling us what that culture was, especially since this is not a book that starts in the middle of her being an adult. We see her as a child growing up, but then we don't see her engage with the culture that she's missing when she's the age that she's meant to be. When she's looking back, she's I miss it when I was 9, and we're but we were there when you and I weren't telling us anything about the world. I just think things were not explained very well to make me connect with the world and the characters. And I think it was kind of a disappointment because I think they just had a very interesting idea behind it. The next thing I read was Frog and Toad. Again, a little kid's book, but I was really excited to read this because I read Wind in the Willows like 3-4 months ago, and I thought that was Frog and Toad. It's not, it's very different. It's just got a toad in it. And this is Frog and Toad, and Frog and Toad is really sweet and cute and humble and about these little two friends who have a little bit of a gay vibe. Like, oh my god, they're so gay coded, I can't lie. I do understand people headcanoning them as gay. Like, they're really, really sweet and they're besties and they like spend Christmas together and they don't really have any other family or friends. They just spend all their time together and they go out shopping together and they get ice cream together and they hang out every day together, and I'm like, that is so cute. And for the last thing that I read, it was poetry. I love poetry. I really, really love poetry, and I'm not very good at reading poetry, however. Like, I like the idea of poetry. I love reading poetry that other people have picked out because I think it tells me something about them. I like understanding poetry, but most of the time I don't think I do understand poetry. I think I need to get better at it. But the last book I read was Portable Paradise, and this is a collection by someone who is thinking about Grenfell. If you don't know what Grenfell is, it was this big tower block fire that happened a couple years ago now. But basically it was this big fire and it was because of this cladding issue at this place, and it was basically the government's fault that this happened. And essentially it was this really sort of angry but very poignant look at what happened at Grenfell and what allowed Grenfell to happen, how we've been conditioned to perhaps like just look past Grenfell or not think about it, or just sort of realize that this is just like unnormal and it shouldn't be, and how we need to perhaps resist against things like this happening to the population within London, within England, within Great Britain, how the government needs to take more accountability for things like this. So yeah, it was a very heavy kind of poetry collection, but there were lots of things I really liked. There were like 3 poems that really stood out to me, so I am really glad I've read it. It's been on my to read for so long. I can't remember who recommended it to me because I've had it on my like Goodreads to read for so many years now, and that was the last thing that I read in autumn. So from now on, I've got all these things to read in winter, and I am glad I made this video. I hope I'll like rewatch this video in like a 4 months time and be like, oh, I remember reading that, because that's what I do with most of my videos. I'm like, oh my god, I remember doing that. I remember reading that. And that is such an interesting and fun thing to do when you make videos. Just like look back on things that you've already done. Even though this video is going on a platform for other people, I'm like, you know who's my biggest audience? Myself, when I'm gonna watch this in about 5 months time. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you liked any of these books, tell me. If you didn't like any of these books, also tell me. And if you didn't like any of the books I didn't like, definitely tell me, because I like bitching about books more than anything else. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. I think it's gonna be really long. I think I spent a lot of time like doing this video now that I think about it. But yeah, have a good day, have a great week, and thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked this video.